Having the pitching machine set up at like 85 miles an hour and having it only like 40 feet away. This is the equivalent of about 115 mile an hour fastball. I'm like, what is this guy doing? There's certainly more people capable of playing at that level than actually playing at that level.
Welcome to this segment. This training is something I've been looking forward to for some time, because let me ask you this. Have you ever wondered, when you watch high performers, call it professional athletes, like what is it they're thinking about that allows them to play their best in the most important times? Have you ever stopped and wondered, like, oh my gosh, these guys make things happen under the most intense of situations and pressure and a whole lot more? Well, today's guest expert is someone who's uniquely qualified to be able to share with you what it takes. In fact, he's got a concept he calls fail the instruction manual, how to actually lean into failure, in many ways embrace failure to learn from those mistakes, to actually perform at the highest level. And he's worked with professional teams like the Timberwolves, like Houston, like many professional NBA teams. He's also got NCAA experience. And here's a fun fact. He and I actually played college baseball together. And there'll be more on that in a little bit. But his name is Dean Cooper. He is known as an expert in behavioral economics and emotional intelligence. I got a chance to know him when he was so far ahead of the game when it came to call it the Moneyball concept of different unique statistics. So he has just a unique dynamic of experience along that. We're also going to talk about patterns of hidden success and what that really shows up as. Leadership, decision-making, navigating failure, and a whole lot more. Dean, welcome to our segment today. How are you, my man?
I'm great, Dan. Thanks. It's great to be on. I appreciate the invite. I appreciate the kind words. And as you mentioned, our history goes back, and obviously you've done well. I think the stuff that you're doing with the leadership is really cool, and I'm honored to not just be on, call you a friend, and I appreciate what you're doing and looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, so let's dive in. I mean, you've worked with people at all kinds of levels, superstars. I mean, generational talent, literally. And you get a chance to see people operating at a whole different level. You also get the chance to see some of the flaws. What do you see, Dean, in what you've observed and studied and tracked? Because you're huge on tracking the most successful people, because it's not just talent. But talk about the mental game, the mindset. Like, what are the most successful people doing that's slightly unique, slightly different than someone that's just that edge down? They might be the 15th guy on the bench, but you and I, not you, me, I'd play against them and they'd school me like in 10 seconds. You know, they'd be hitting threes and bombs from everywhere. But when they get out on the court and compete against the most successful people at that level, they're just average at best in a lot of ways. Talk about that a little bit.
There's a big umbrella to that, so I'll try to
Yes,
hit the highlights and some things that I think are the most important, because the one thing you said that is absolutely true is, I don't want to say lots of people who are talented enough that might be a little bit of a hyperbole, that can play at the highest level, but there's more people capable of playing at the highest level in any given sport. As far as that, I can't really speak to other things, but sport, no matter what it is, there's certainly more people capable of playing at that level than actually playing at that level. And if you take out the luck factor of just sometimes it's being in the right place at the right time, and you filter all that out, the thing that separates what pros and what they do, I think are a few things. And guys who, when I say I'm talking about guys who can have longevity, not kind of one hit wonder, 1 or 2 years in any given league, but their ability to, number one, learn quickly. Doesn't matter. You got to play for different head coaches, offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, whatever it is in football. You got to learn a new language. You got to learn it quickly. You got to learn a system. You got to learn it quickly. So the ability to learn quickly and apply it is a skill in and of itself. Now, some people do it naturally. I think most players probably have to be more intentional about it than people think. That's a huge separator, is just the ability to, especially in like when I say our league, I'm talking about the NBA where you've got 82 games, you don't have a lot of practice time. Most of your learning is done through film. Practices are short. You don't, it's not like college where you got 2, 3, 4 days between games and you're practicing 2 hours, and that just doesn't happen. So that's a big separator. The other separator is understanding, and this you'll know what I mean by this, and then I'll get a little bit more granular with it. But like, what is it to actually be a pro? There's multiple nuggets to that. Number one is, and first and foremost, is how do you take care of your body? And if you look at the guys who really do it at a high level, it starts first and foremost, and this is what young kids struggle with today because of social media, gaming, all those things, is rest. The value of rest and recovery is vastly underestimated and not done well by young people. Now, I went to bed at 9 o'clock when we were young because there was nothing else to do, but that's not the case anymore. So that's one of the aspects of it for sure. And then the other aspect of it that's massive, which is also not something that at least kids in the US, because of our consumption of an ability to get poor nutritional food, is like the guys who really know what they're doing invest heavily in how they eat. Like those two things. And, every team now, doesn't matter what sport, like at the professional level and Power Five level, is you have chefs and people are monitoring what you're eating and all those things. So I think those are the big separators. Like there's obviously other things, but if you just say, just given that the talent, but recovery, nutrition, and then first and foremost at the top of the list is being able to learn quickly and apply it quickly, because people just don't have time. You don't get a chance to make multiple mistakes.
Yep. Yeah. And, we see this a lot in business, right? And so, part of today's segment is also applying winning in sports, which you've been able to do at all kinds of different organizations, at all kinds of different levels, Dean, and even your own performance over the years. But also then apply it in business, right? Where, every day is kind of like game day. Like there's not a lot of, unfortunately, there's not a lot of practice time unless you really are very intentional and very conscious, which that's a big one I see that is missed a lot, is people are not really putting themselves into a practice in business. It's just game time all the time. And so it's this kind of frenetic experience. And you have to learn very fast and apply it, or just keep repeating the same bad habits or good habits, depending on what you have. So speak to that a little bit. How do you see some of these characteristics of high performers applied to business? Again, you've been around some of the top, most successful executives as well, business people, owners, and a whole lot more.
Again, another great question. There's multiple aspects, but if you ask me, like, what are the pillars of those things, that where does it look successful versus unsuccessful? I think in business or any organization, whether that's sports or private business, whatever that is, number one, obviously, first and foremost, it starts with a positive and healthy communication feedback loop. You have to have positive, healthy communication feedback loop. It has to be continuous. It has to be ongoing. And then the word I use often is it has to be preventative maintenance. When the oil light comes on in your car, it's too late. You have to prevent the oil light from coming on. In line with that, I would say, is what people refer to, I shouldn't say I call, people refer to as vertical alignment. In our business, we'll say, whether it's the NBA or college, it's like the owner, the general manager, the head coach, the assistant coaches, the video coordinators, the support staff, the medical people. So it's like everybody has to have the same vision. It's got to be vertically aligned. and then whatever that looks like in any given organizational chart, for lack of a better way to put it, the real world, because, I have lived in the real world, from the CEO to the CFO, CO, you can go right down. Like, you have to have vertical alignment. I think that's really important. I feel like people don't spend enough time really thinking about their decision hygiene and what do decisions look like and how do you arrive at proper decisions. So, like, when I say, to define decision hygiene, like Kahneman would, like the father of behavioral economics, and Richard Thaler would be, what are the processes that you go through so that you can eliminate emotional decisions and be as consistent within whatever your mission statement in any given business is. I think that's really important. If you take those factors in, if you ask me to say, what do I think the highlights are, I would say that those things, like positive, healthy communication, feedback loop. And that's not saying, I'm certainly not implying that people are going to agree on every single thing. They're just not.
Yep.
But healthy communication is listening to whomever it is and deciding, can we meet in the middle? Is it 80-20? The other thing I think that happens in organizations often is there's a unhealthy organizations versus healthy is the credit factor. Like, who's
Mm.
getting credit and where is the idea coming from? And I can tell you this in sports. Again, I can't speak to real business, but the best organizations don't, the head coaches, GMs, like, they don't care if it came from the first lieutenant or the intern video coordinator. They literally don't care.
There's so many valuable nuggets here, Dean, and I want to hit on the healthy communication, right? Because like we grew up in a generation where Bobby Knight, and if you're watching this and you're young, you have to go on YouTube to actually see who Bobby Knight was, and he'd be throwing chairs across. And he was known as a coach who would get in your grill, right? And depending on who you would ask, there's many examples of that being unhealthy communication, the screaming and the yelling. It's there's just that visual. And then there's other coaches, like Pop for the Spurs before he moved up into the front office. He was a Socratic leader, but he'd get in your grill. So speak to the idea, because I feel like at times people take it one extreme or the other. They get too passive in their communication, or they get too aggressive in their, and like what I hear you saying is healthy communication and then observing great communicators. I believe that healthy friction actually creates diamonds. Disagreement, perspective creates growth in the right, healthy culture. So speak to that a little bit on your observation and your version of friction creating diamonds in a good communication structure.
You hit it right on the head. Like, it's not even like, is some friction healthy? It's just, it's going to happen. We all came from different experiences and were formed by whatever that is, like DNA, environmental. And when I say environmental, whether that's a family dynamic, a community dynamic, who we had as coaches, whatever input we had growing up and as we were in our formative years, it has a huge impact on us. And then, do we have escalation of commitment? Do we believe that the things that we originally believed that's the way it is, or do we have a growth mindset? I think that's really important. I think where people get confused is really good leaders of any type. The two words that I come to mind are belittle or demean people. And I think what gets confused is people think that accountability is synonymous with belittling or demeaning. It's not. You can hold people accountable in a multitude of ways, which doesn't have to be. And, it's funny you bring up Coach Knight because, his son Patrick is my best friend. He was my best man in my wedding. So I was around Coach a lot. And some of those times were difficult, but at the end of the day, you knew he cared about you. And as much as I admire his, certainly his basketball mind, if you said, is that the way I would go about it? Certainly not. It's not in my DNA. Been around pros. You can't do that. But times have changed. And just in that regard, it worked for him at the time that he did it. Now, times have changed, but I think it just comes down to like, accountability. And I always say this when I get involved in something. What I always say is just, I don't care what the rules of the game are. Just let me know what the rules are and just don't move the goalpost. And I think if you can be consistent with that and treat everybody fairly, that matters. Now, there's something I think employees or subordinates, maybe not employees, confuse fairness and equity. Everybody should be treated equally and fair, but that doesn't mean everybody's treated exactly the same. That things that motivate some people or demotivate them from negative behaviors, again, we're not all wired the same. So that's like a subordinate issue is me judging how the boss, the coach, the CEO, whomever that is, the midman is like, well, they're treating so and so this way and this. Well, there's a real disconnect in that. And that's not a leadership issue per se, but I do think as a leader, you need to spell that out for the people that you're leading. Like I'm going to treat everybody with equal standards. I call them standards, expectations, accountability. What are our standards? What are the expectations? And we're going to hold you accountable. Now, how I individually dress each of you is going to be different based on how I can get you to respond.
Yeah, and it's amazing you bring this up because, we're at a time, Dean, right now. Caitlin Clark's pretty, getting a lot of traction and has the last 2.5+ years. There's a lot of animosity it seems, in the WNBA over her popularity and notoriety and this sort of thing. It almost feels to a degree what you're describing is some of that. It's not fair. She's not necessarily the best player in the league, but man, she has popularized the league. She took someone who had no real interest at all in the WNBA and she turned me into someone I'm interested in, like checking her out, checking out the other and seeing other talent because of it and bringing eyeballs to a sport that is growing immensely, right? So maybe tie in what you're talking about a little bit related to this idea of leadership, standards, expectation, accountability of how that could play out, whether it's Caitlin Clark in that example or something, a story you can think of without naming a player probably, but just an example.
The Caitlin Clark WNBA thing is it's a very fascinating thing because, and I'll say this, there's, and I'm not gonna, and I don't overwatch it or pay attention to it, but I pay attention to it now. If a good friend of mine, Carl Semesco, is the head coach of the Atlanta Dream. If you just want me to get on a soapbox, or I think there's culpability on both sides of the friction there is. Yeah. She was sort of crowned I don't want to say the savior, but everybody knew she was some level of impact that she was going to have in the popularity of the league. She didn't ask for that, and not to say she didn't want it either. I have no idea, but there was a media, this is the times that we live in. And there's some culpability on her side. She has not particularly, she's a tremendous talent. I think there's maturity level that has to take place with her handling herself on the court. So whether that comes from the pressure, I can't speak to that. But I would say in that situation, there's some culpability on both sides, almost like every situation. But as far as like standards, expectations, accountability is, I don't really particularly, and this is growing up from somebody who grew up in a family, my dad was a police officer, got 10 or 11 of them in our family, but I'm not a particular fan of rules. Rules are something that you follow. You stop at the stop sign because that's what you're supposed to do. You pay your taxes because that's what you're supposed to do. Those are like, you do them because you have to. So standards are something you can achieve. rules are just something you follow. I think, standards, like what is our standard? It's like, are you performing? Are you bringing the necessary cognitive behaviors and energy and effort that we expect here? So it starts with that. And then expectations is like they're very closely tied. I think in my mind, what separates expectations is there's a standard for everybody. The expectation for everybody isn't the same based on your level of the ceiling of your skill set, right? Like the 14th guy in the roster can't be expected to do the same things that Michael and Kobe and LeBron and whomever are doing. Like that's just
Yeah.
unreasonable. And then the accountability part of it is everybody has to have the same level of accountability. That's the hardest thing in my mind is for any leader. I don't care what you're leading. You could be leading the pack of Huskies that's taking you through the North Pole or what the Iditarod or whatever. Like the accountability has to be the same for everybody. It might look different, like I mentioned earlier, in how you handle it, but you mentioned Pop. You can go back and watch. He was as hard on Duncan and Ginobili and Parker as he was, if not harder than everybody else. Like when you can coach your top performers in whatever industry you're in, that's when you have something that has a chance to be special.
And speaking of that, Dean, what you made me just think of in translating this to a degree into business too is like, one of the things that we do is we focus on the standard of excellence related to controlling controllables, right? We put skills over in a separate bucket to a degree. Of course, we kind of expect people to have a certain skill set, and everybody's different, kind of to the point you brought up, even in business. But
Yeah.
attitude, work ethic, right? Attitude, work ethic, and then, how are we applying what we're doing? Implementation. What are we bringing to the table in those consistently every single day? Because it doesn't cost anything to have a good attitude. And I'm sure you run across all kinds of scenarios. A guy has a bad game, and man, I can only imagine what that can be like with professional athletes at times. And then the work ethic, that can, vary, of course, in business, but I imagine you see that in sports too. And then the application factor, call it intention to implement. There's something I observe in all kinds of people is defiant compliant. It's almost around rules and standards. Oh, I'm just going to do it just because I got to do it defiantly, but they're compliant just to say,
Yeah. Yeah.
check a box, right? So
Yep.
I don't know, speak to that a little bit as you've seen it in sports with high performers versus those maybe who aren't quite there.
Again, there's so many good questions here, but I did want to touch on something I think is important. And you mentioned my book, and it's obviously a thing, but the letter A is avoid, and unintentionally, actually, the very first bullet point in my book about is if you want to fail is avoid difficult conversations. My dad would always tell me, I don't want to say growing up, maybe when I got older before he passed away, it was like the most important conversations you're going to have in your life are the difficult ones. Just sitting around and shooting the breeze, and those are usually they're enjoyable, and you certainly can gain some wisdom or knowledge or and all those things out of them, but they're not the most important conversations you have. The tough ones, and people they're scared of that a little bit. So, like I said, unintentionally, that just happened to be the way the book worked out. But the way I look at it is, if you can't do that, and there's not one single thing that comes up after that that's going to make you successful.
Now, speaking of your book, Fail, the Instruction Manual, it's a counterintuitive approach to actually
Yeah.
embrace and acknowledge failure, not be afraid of it. I just love the whole idea of that. It's funny because when my kids were young, one of the things we used to do at dinner is, with gratitude, what are you happy about today? And then we'd go, what mistakes did you make today or this week? What did you learn from it? Right? Instead of them at, 5, 6, 7, being afraid to fail, we would open up and talk about it and then, okay, what did we learn? We all make mistakes, right? So Speak to that a little bit and then tell people how they can reach you and get your book.
The book is it's kind of like a Saturday Night Live skit. The subtitle is a satirical A to Z guide, and really what it is, it's really not an advice book or how to not fail. It's what it is it's A to Z book. Every letter has a word associated with it. Whether, like I said, it's A is avoid, and then it talks about several things. If you avoid, you're probably gonna on your way to failure. And B is blame. L is back to my what we talked about early in the conversation is lack of communication. R is resisting change. It's not an instruction manual or how to really bounce back from failure. If you want to fail, do these behaviors. If you don't want to fail, avoid them, or which is it's impossible. We all have some level. We might not have all 20 whatever behaviors, but we have some of them, and we have them at different levels. Maybe resisting change, maybe I'm a 2 and you're an 8, but maybe on blame, I'm an 8 and you're a 2. Like, so the purpose of the book was to create conversation over difficult subjects where you can maybe laugh about it. There can be a level of jovialness. Like it's a way to, man, I look at this and holy cow, I do this, or I recognize this in one of my employees, or man, I see myself creeping in this direction, and being okay with it. And you just use the word intentional, like being very intentional about how to avoid things or steer your way around or work your way out of dysfunctional behaviors that hold organizations and teams and even ourselves back. We all have them. We all have them. We got them. We don't have all of them. And we have them at different levels. And that's the hardest part about cohesion, where it comes back to, the very first thing I said, like you got to have a healthy feedback loop. It's not flowers and honey and all that. That's not what that means. It just means that it's healthy communication, that two people can sit down or more and talk back and forth about any given issue and hear each other out, go process it, come back and do it again. My main thing with that is the best organizations I've been in is the communication feedback loop is continuous. I say it all the time, like, when people don't communicate with you, whether it's your spouse or your kids or your friends or whomever, your boss, doesn't matter. When communication stops or lags, there's a level of wondering what the trust level should be here. It's the way it is.
Yeah, and speaking of Dean, getting that feedback loop, and if people want to get your book or get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach you and get access to your book?
Yeah, they can email me at www.space for curiosity, and it's the word for FOR, space for curiosity.com is my email. You can get on there. I had a blog going for a while where I'd write some stuff. It's mostly around behavioral economics, emotional intelligence. And with now coaching, I haven't updated it in a while. They get in touch with me. You can order a book. I send them out personally. I just think that, a big part of leadership too, maybe a good way to kind of put a bow on this. The reason that that's called Space for Curiosity, I'm just a believer, like if you aren't continuing, and the world changes fast, behaviors change fast, influences from external that change behaviors, social media, the internet, there's going to be something new coming along. We just don't know what it is yet. That if you're not perpetually curious, man, it's just hard. Like I people ask me all the time, like what my sort of highlight of my career is, because I've been the luckiest dude from a town of 4,000 people that you could ever be.
Belding,
And,
Michigan.
Belding, Michigan. It's not because I'm smart. I got incredibly fortunate to have great high school coaches, great college coaches like Coach Beauchamp that we both played for that fortunately I still consider a friend and talk to and a mentor. But I say all that saying, that all that stuff's great. The thing that I'm most proud of is I feel like I'm a lifelong learner and I'm trying to just figure out how to be the better version of me in multiple walks of life, husband, brother, coach, mentor, whatever it is. Like, I just try to figure out how to be the best version of me that can be without just being quote unquote stuck in, well, this is the way we always did it.
So if you're looking for a way to be the very best you can be, you're looking for a way to roll in emotional intelligence, leadership, having those tough conversations, create feedback loops, create healthy communication, and a whole lot more, I encourage you, go to spaceforcuriosity.com. That's spaceforcuriosity.com. Get the book, get in touch with Dean. He can share with you some insights, some viewpoints that just might help you get to that next level. Now, Dean, as we wrap this up for sake of time here, what is something I should have asked you that I didn't get a chance to ask you yet?
Well, I don't know about that, but it's great being on. And like I said, like I think this stuff that you're doing, this leadership, it's funny. Like I think if you ask each of us, maybe you should ask me, how did we both arrive here 35-ish years after being teammates that this became a important thing for us? And my answer to that would probably be, and maybe the same for you, I'm not going to answer for you, is I had mostly good leaders along the way. And I wanted to be able to emulate those in my own style and maybe some that weren't in organizations that weren't as healthy as others. But yeah, if you said ask one question that you could ask, like, how did we, two dudes playing Aquinas College baseball and going to the batting cage and trying to figure it out and be the best version of that version of us. How did our past end up in a similar trajectory? I wouldn't know the answer for sure, but I know this. I think it's pretty cool, and that I admire a lot about what you've accomplished in your business life and personal life, and being able to recognize the importance of sort of passing it, forward, paying it
Yeah,
forward.
absolutely, my friend. You brought up Coach Bo. What is something that you recall from Coach Bo that you still take with you today that has made you a great leader, coach, mentor, dad, etc.?
I definitely would say he didn't use these words, but the influence that he had that made my mind create standards, expectations, accountability. I think and servant leadership, to be a true, like, I tell people all the time, people ask me, this happened a few months ago. I ran into, when I was back in Nashville, I was actually just having coffee, and there was somebody came through and they had a Grand Rapids, Michigan sweatshirt on. And I asked, and they said, yeah, I went to Aquinas. And I said, oh, I played baseball. I Coach Bo. Oh, what did you think of him? We think he's great. And just the first words out of my mouth were servant leader. Like, you talk about standards, expectations, accountability, like he was the master. And without ever belittling, demeaning, he was demanding, he was forceful at times, but there was never any doubt that he was just trying to get us to be the best version of us we could be. And I would definitely say the standards expectation count, that is Terry Beauchamp written all over it.
Agreed. That's why I wanted to bring it up. And Coach Bo, if you ever see this, love you, man. I can't speak, of course, for Dean, but if you saw this, you heard what he said, and I feel the same way, and just, really grateful. Steward leadership. I think you hit the nail right on the head, Dean. Here's another weird question. What is someone, because a lot of people don't even know much about my baseball history in business. What is something that you remember of our baseball history together that would maybe surprise people, but not surprise people as it relates to the DNA or whatever you would want to call it of me as
Yeah.
an athlete as we work
Well,
together because we spent a lot of time together.
you and I have laughed about this multiple times, and as I've laughed about it with other our teammates, is when you first got there, because I think I was a year or two, maybe I was a junior when you got there. So the first time of walking in and seeing you in the, and I understand like you want to make things harder than what they actually are. And like having the pitching machine set up at like 85 miles an hour and having it only like 40 feet away, I'm like, what is this guy doing? Like, this is insane. This is the equivalent of about 115-mile-an-hour fastball, which, by the way, oh boy from the Milwaukee is like
Miz is amazing.
it's amazing. Like, so maybe you were 40 years ahead of your time or whatever it is, but I always remember that. And then I thought, okay, like I understand like trying to test yourself, but holy moly, this guy's like on another level. And I'll just never forget it. But and in all honesty, not just because I'm on here and it speaks to, I know the success you've had in your previous businesses and you're having now is dedication and work ethic and grit. If you ask me to describe Dan Kuschell, that's how I would describe it.
No, thank you, Dean. That means a lot. I mean, we had a lot of laughs, a lot of work together. You were 2 years ahead, and I remember so many memorable conversations, good times, bad times, up times, down times. I remember you nudging me along as don't get down, stay even. And I think this comes even my observation of you. It's no surprise with your understanding. I'll call it the money ball kind of mentality. You had that even back then. Like you were ahead of your time. Behavioral, the emotional intelligence, that's become a thing now in the last decade. But I mean, you were always just so even keel, never up, never too down, even keel. And it's no surprise to me, man, that you have had such the impact that you have. I know you live an amazing family. Like, what's 1 to 3 things you'd love our audience to walk away from our conversation from today? Action steps they could take from what you shared.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is the most important thing to me is like be curious, like just be, and it can be random. I read random things. That's the greatest thing about AI now, quite honestly. Like, and I'm not a big like computer, but like I love it. You can have a conversation with that thing. You can just pick a subject and it's like I still read books. Like I'm reading a book now called Moral Economics and things like that. So I just think be curious. If you don't do anything else in life, just be curious on multiple subjects, understanding that, you're going to try a couple things that you're going to probably figure out quickly. It's not really my thing. That's okay. Just move on. The part of with the fail, like, be honest with yourself, recognize we are all flawed humans. Like we are all flawed in different ways and in different aspects of our life. I don't I'll use this. I'm just sitting, but I think like when I go talk at places out, I usually take a tube of toothpaste. I ask them, if I take the cap off this, what is this going to come out? So I'll just ask this, like if I squeeze this top on here, what's going to come out? And I'll just get the general answer, soap. Okay, well, why? And kids will stumble around and even adults will stumble around. Well, soap is going to come out of here because that's what was put into it. Toothpaste is going to come out of a tube of toothpaste. Mustard is not coming out. Ketchup is not, understanding that you're only going to get out of any given relationship or endeavor what you put into it. You can't think that you're putting junk in and getting gold out. That's just not the way it works. And I think it's closely tied to that is I think we have to be okay with that we're flawed, but we have to recognize what those flaws are. We have to accept what they are. We have to acknowledge what they are. And then we have to address what they are with intentionality.
He's Dean Cooper. I encourage you, go check out his work at spaceforcuriosity.com. Check him out on LinkedIn, social media. I've got multiple pages of notes. Take action with what he's shared with you. Be curious. realize that if you want gold out, put gold in. If you just want toothpaste out, just put toothpaste in. You
And
get what you put in. And then last but not least, we're all flawed. Every person in the world is flawed in some way. Nobody's more perfect than anybody else. We all have them. Acknowledge it and then move forward. Keep moving forward. Be curious. Take action. Go to spaceforcuriosity.com. He's Dean Cooper. I'm Dan Kuschell. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you on another segment right around the bend. Dean, thanks for being with us.
thank you. I enjoyed it.